On this edition of the Writers Showcase podcast, author Bob Mustin joins us to discuss his latest book, The Blue Bicycle. Welcome to this edition of the Writers Showcase podcast. I'm Phil Naessens, and I'm your host each and every week, bringing you writers from various genres, letting us know what they're up to, reading from their books, and introducing you to books and writers that you may or may not have heard of. And this edition is a writer who's been here before. This is his second time on the podcast. Please welcome the author of The Blue Bicycle, Mr. Bob Mustin. Bob, welcome back to the program. How are you tonight?
Great, Phil. Thanks for having me back. It's really a pleasure to be back with you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. For those who are new to the podcast, and we definitely have seen some increased traffic, they may or may not have heard of you. Can you give us a brief overview of who you are?
Sure. I was what was called a military brat, raised in a military family. Served briefly in the Navy before I had an engineering career. All during those years, I did some form of writing. I even wrote technical specifications at one point, which really is creative too. It's just in a different direction. I write pretty much full time now. Have increasingly written full time over the last 20 years. Even while I was working as an engineer. My wife and I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina now, trying to live a nice, quiet life of creativity. We live in Asheville, North Carolina. It's really a nice community for creative people. My wife weaves. She does a lot of weaving, and I write.
Sounds like a perfect existence.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I'm sure it is. I'm jealous. Now, where is your favorite place of all places you've been to actually sit down and write?
I think where I'm sitting right now, I have an office in the basement of our house, and it's quiet down here. I don't have a whole lot of temptations. I'm surrounded by 3 walls with guitars hanging on them, but they don't seem to tempt me when I'm writing. The only temptation I have to draw my attention away from my writing is the one all writers complain about, and that's the internet.
Yeah, the internet can definitely be a distraction, can't it?
Yeah, it's so handy.
It is handy. Now, you say you have guitars on the wall, so you play then, right?
I do. That's changed a little bit over the years. I've gotten where I don't use a flat pick very well anymore, but I finger pick. Mostly right now I'm playing Renaissance music and classical stuff on nylon string guitars.
The nylon. That's the old school, huh?
Yeah, that's what I started playing. I started playing folk guitar years and years ago with an old friend of mine named Eric Taylor, who is a really talented Texas songwriter now. I've done a lot of things, played electric for a while, played folk music on steel string, acoustic guitar, and now I'm back to the nylon.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Now, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I think I would be comfortable living most anywhere. My family's heritage, both my mother and father's families migrated to the U.S. from British Isles. And my wife, her family has Irish heritage. So I think based on maybe my genetic predispositions, I would probably favor the British Isles somewhere. I'm not sure where. Maybe Wales.
Okay, I have friends in Wales. One of my longtime students who lived here in Corfu with her parents, her mother's from Wales. So I have a lot of Welsh clients. So I probably could live there too, but it rains a lot there, right?
Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't get as hot as it does in the southern part of the U.S. So
It doesn't, believe
I
me.
could stand the rain if the heat wasn't there.
Well, there's no heat there, so you'll be all right. Now, if you could live in any time period, what time period would that be?
I think I would probably pick the 14th century. That was the middle of the Renaissance era. Maybe I'm being influenced by my interest in Renaissance music. But I think my main interest is Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales. That was his time frame. And the Renaissance era wasn't as terrible a time to live in as a lot of people think. You had a lot to do there. There were constant wars and things like that, but probably no more than we have today. One of the things I think that draws me, and I may be laboring under a misconception, but from reading Canterbury Tales, there was a lot of storytelling, and a lot of it wasn't remotely true, but people had fun telling stories, and I've always had fun listening to stories as well as writing them. And I'm not all that concerned with them being true as long as it's a good story.
All right, well, you would fit in right well in Corfu, I'll tell you that. Because they tell some stories here. Let me ask you something. If you could meet just one writer, living or dead, who would that be?
I think that probably would depend on what I'm writing at the moment. I write it from a lot of different perspectives. I've just finished writing a short story collection of weird stories, uh, strange happenstance type stories. So I think based on that, Edgar Allan Poe would probably be somebody I would be interested in meeting. I don't really know a lot about Poe except what I learned in college and high school literature classes, but he might be a pretty interesting person to talk to.
Yeah, he was a pretty good storyteller, wasn't he?
Yeah, creepy, but really, really talented writer.
He probably was like that in real life, too, a little creepy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, well, to each his own. I kind of like it that way, actually. At least you know what you're getting. You know, he was pretty upfront. But how did you become a suspense writer? Even though the Blue Bicycle isn't like a suspense book, that's the main thing that you do. How did you become a suspense writer?
Well, I think suspense is has to be a main aspect of whatever you write. As a particularly as a fiction writer, even as a nonfiction writer, a lot of nonfiction today is taking the form of some of the strategies that fiction writers have. And of course, suspense is one of those things that keeps a writer flipping pages. You know, you get to be 10 o'clock and you're a little bit sleepy, and you get to a good chapter and you say, my God, what's happening on the next page? And you flip it over, and before you know it, it's midnight. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned as a writer, is to be that aware of what triggers interest in readers. I think most writers begin by writing mostly for themselves, but if you're really going to be successful at it, you have to really have your writers in mind. And writing with a sense of suspense in whatever you write keeps the readers going.
And you definitely do that, my friend. You definitely do that. You had me on all 3 of the books of yours that I've read, and I enjoyed that. I lost some sleep, but then I don't sleep that much anyway, so it's all good. As an independent writer, and that's technically what you are, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any marketing tips or strategies that you'd like to share for other independent writers?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that you have to keep in mind that it's a really tough publishing world right now. There are a lot of avenues that you can make use of to learn how to write and to improve your writing. Uh, but it's not a given that you can get published these days. There's just so many people out there writing, and the competition is heavy, and the publishing industry is kind of turned upside down now by technology, and they're being bought out by conglomerates. So the advice I would have is that to any writer that is wanting to start writing or is writing and is seeking publication, is you have to use the same amount of creativity in somehow gaining publication that you use to write your stories. It's a different kind of creativity, but you have to be really creative. You have to think of different ways, different avenues to be published, different ways to have your stuff reach an audience. You just have to know what you're good at in that aspect too. Some people are good at editing, which gives you a good story. Some people are much better at promotion. I don't think I'm as good at that as I am some of the technical aspects of writing. Some people are better at teaching. You can gain a good audience that way, sell books that way. My main talent, I think, is an organizational ability and being able to facilitate all the different aspects of what it takes to get from beginning writing a book to getting published through an organization. That's one of the reasons I've entered into this writers co-op that begun just recently.
Excellent. We're off to a flying start. And after the music, Bob will be reading from his latest novel, The Blue Bicycle. And we'll be right back. You're listening to the Writers Showcase Podcast with Phil Naessens.